Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to my 40k channel. Today is a painting tutorial of the recently updated model of the Clone Lord himself, Fabius Bile. I would tell you that it was a blast painting this little heretic, but that would be a lie. Flesh is something that I have personally struggled with in painting, and having a character covered in essentially a tanned flesh cloak doesn't exactly endear me to the model. Now, that said, I've recently listened to both the books, Primogenitor and Clone Lord, and both of these books were excellent, and well, that's why we're here. In any case, this tutorial will go over how to paint this model in a measly, let me check my notes here, 30 colors. Jesus, like, no wonder this model was such a pain in the... 30 wonderful colors, ladies and gentlemen. As always, the list of colors are in order of application down in the description, so let's get started. First, I use Vellejo Black to prime all the parts that were not to be covered in flesh. Given how the model is constructed, I pretty much put every part of him on a separate stick for ease of painting. I had 12 components in all, only really assemble the chirurgeon on his backpack. You don't need to use an airbrush, but I prefer it for my base coats to ensure a nice smooth covering. After this, I use Vellejo White to prime the parts that are predominantly flesh, so both the front and back, one of the shoulder guards, and a small segment where his tools sit on his side. I use white typically because for lighter colors you want a very light prime, simply so that way the lighter colors, when they get applied, it doesn't take forever to apply them. Now, to prime with white, I strongly recommend that you have an airbrush, because white and lighter colors in general are very difficult to apply in large swaths of the model via a brush. The first real color we will apply is Naggaroth Night, and this is for all of the black primed pieces we have done. This will apply the base of the Emperor's Children armor color scheme. For the flesh, I used Bugmans Glow via the airbrush over all of the white prime pieces. Now that the airbrush is no longer needed, I want to get in there and start working on that flesh piece right away, as it's the hardest and pretty much the most dominant striking piece on the model, for the exception of the chirurgeon itself. So, I used Agrax Earthshade to cover all of the flesh except the face. For the face itself, I actually used Reikland fleshade to cover the face, so give it basically a different hue. And while that dried, I used Nuln oil to cover all of the other parts that were painted in purple. So on the patches on the cloak itself, I use Cadian fleshtone to start brightening it back up. Careful not to get into any of the deepest recesses, or else you're going to undo the shade that we just did. Now we're going to create a bit of a glaze using a mixture of Reikland fleshade and lahmian medium. This is going to cover all of the flesh panels on the cloak, bringing everything down to a little bit of a warmer hue and kind of blending everything together. Then we can do Screaming Skull against Fabius's face. Avoid the darker recesses for the face, like the eyes and mouth. Now, I don't recommend using Screaming Skull for the edge highlight for the cloak. Given the amount of washes we have done, it's actually a bit too bright. I made this mistake personally, which took forever to apply, and then I ended up going over it with the next step. So for this step, we're going to use Cadian fleshtone again, and this is going to be for an edge highlight of the entire cloak. So you want to go and edge every single corner, every single line that is on the cloak. This is going to take a significant amount of time, but it's going to make those details and all of those little patches stand out considerably. And then once that's done, you're going to want to do a quick watered down bit of Reikland fleshade again to blend everything back down. Now the cloak is, for all intents and purposes, done. Like I said, I wanted to get it done right out of the gate, because if it didn't look good, then the rest of the model isn't going to look good. So, moving on. I used gray seer to color the hair on both Fabius and the severed head that is sitting at his waist. Also, don't forget to hit up the small brain area that's on his backpack, and a little patch where his surgical equipment is on his side. Then we're going to hit Abbadon Black for all of his black bits, specifically the gloves and a lot of his belt, small cable, some straps that are on his front, and usually there's a little bit of small casings up on the chirurgeon itself. Now for the severed head, I'm going to hit it with Rakarth Flesh. And then we're going to immediately follow that up with Pallid Witch Flesh. For all of the tubing and canisters that will have a bit of a blue glow, I put down a base of Incubi Darkness. We aren't going to shade these areas, that's why we're starting with such a dark color here. Following that, I used Temple Guard Blue on the tubing. You don't need to cover the entire tube, but say around 80% of it, obviously leaving the darkest recesses. Now for the canisters themselves, I only painted roughly halfway up the tube to give the effect of multiple different liquids in place. Now, in hindsight, I should have not exactly made it exactly even, but have maybe a more wavy pattern to give it a liquid feel. Also, you can use this as an edge highlight for some of the black bits, like on the chirurgeon, to have them stand out a bit, and also on the cane as well. There's a bit of red on the model as well, and for those parts I use Khorne red for the canisters, and a small patch on the underside of the severed head. Like on the blue canisters, I used a lighter red, Mepheston red in this case, to be the other half of the canister. For a little bit of tubing, namely on the front piece of Fabius and some parts on the backpack, I colored Eshin gray to give it a minor bit of variation. And now we got the backpack area on the cloak covered with Naggaroth Night to match the rest of the armor that's been painted. Alright, all the main paint's done now, and we're going to move on to the metals, of which there are 3. So we're going to start with Retributor armor over all of the gold areas. For me, anything that was directly on Fabius's person, like his armor, his backpack, or his gloves, would have that nice gold trim, and this would also include his staff. Then I did Leadbelcher for all of the silver metals. I did this step a little bit early. You may see that some of the previous screenshots show some of this silver already painted in, but when I was doing that, I quickly realized I needed to finish other parts on the model so that way I can do this step in its entirety. If you're feeling particularly brave, hit up the small little rings on the flesh coat, holding the straps in place. Now for the last metal, I used Fulgurite Copper. Now I admit, I use this mainly because I almost never use this color, and I wanted a little bit of variation so it wasn't gold everywhere. I use this wherever that there was a piece of metal that wasn't going to be on Fabius directly. So other areas on his chirurgeon and his surgical tools and also his gun. For the final round of washes, you're going to use Carroburg Crimson real quick on the brain on the backpack. This will give it a more organic living brain aspect. Reikland Fleshade over all of the non-silver metal. And finally Nuln oil over all of the silver metal. Whew, okay, final stretch now. If you want to call it a day here and walk away happy, you can, but if you want to do a little bit more, there's less than a dozen colors left. Oh, Jesus, a dozen. And all we need to do basically at this point is edging. First, we are going to give those cables a bit of a glow with Baharroth blue. For the liquid containers, you're looking to simply paint a line where the two colors meet to show where they are mixing. On the cables, you don't cover the entire previous color. You're looking to cover maybe 40 to 50% of the existing color. Then is Pallid witch flesh for your decapitated head. Avoid the recesses, just hit the high points on the model. Next is Ulthuan gray for all of the hair, and as well as an edge highlight for the tool pouch area on his side. Obviously you want to avoid the deepest recesses on the hair. For a very small highlight, Evil Sunz Scarlet in the same manner that we use Baharroth blue, but on the red tubes instead. For some of the tools and cutting implements, I used Ironbreaker to cover those tools. I advise leaving the drill area alone though, that's going to be covered later. On the black areas, like the gloves and some of the tubing that you didn't previously use your Temple Guard blue on, then use Administratum gray so that way these features can then stand out. So like specifically his gloves. On the purple armor, we're going to use two different highlights. The first is Xeris Purple, but you will probably find that this is going to be too dark on its own. Once you're done with the Xeris Purple, you're going to use Screamer Pink on the sharpest edges that would directly be hit by light. This is going to help make the Xeris Purple stand out a bit more and drive home that purple armor on the small sections that they show in the model. And last, and definitely least, as always, is Stormhost Silver. You want to hit almost all of the edges for basically all of the metal, all around the model. This is also where you're going to finish off the drill by hitting the edges and leaving the deepest recesses dark. This is the last step, and it's going to take a while because there's a lot of metal on the model here and there that you would have to touch up, but when you're done, you're done. With that last highlight applied, we are finally done. Man, that was a lot of colors. Hopefully, you will like the end result. I'm pleasantly surprised in how this guy came out. Flesh isn't my strong suit, but overall, I am not disappointed. I hope this video was useful for you in painting your miniature, and as always, in the details below are going to be all the colors in order of application. And if you're wondering about that snazzy little base that he's on, I did a previous video, how to make a simple base, that covers exactly how to make the very base that he's standing on. It's quick and easy. You should go check it out. Until next video.